Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our town hall event called Anti-Racism and White Allies. What comes next? We have a large crowd gathered here today, so I promise you it will be a fascinating conversation. We are all very glad that you are here. My name is Mike Eilon. I am the CEO of Greek University. I'd like to welcome everyone to a unique online event in which we will have a featured speaker for approximately 30 minutes. We will then break into facilitated small group listening sessions. And finally, we will bring everyone back to the main room for a conclusion wrap-up session. This entire event will be completed in 90 minutes. I have to thank our featured speakers, as well as all of our amazing 22 table hosts or facilitators for making this event possible. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the event, so feel free to use that if you have any additional questions. It is possible that we will answer your questions before the break into our smaller groups, or perhaps after we return from the small groups into the main session. All right, so let's introduce our featured speakers today. Dr. Kari Winter speaks on a wide variety of topics tied to gender, race, class, and also American literature and history. She served as director of the University of Buffalo's Institute for Research and Education on Women and Gender, the Gender Institute, which supports research on women and on the intricate connections between gender and other social forces such as sexuality, race, class, health, age, religion, and place. Kari's own research focuses on 18th and 19th century American culture, particularly the history and literature of transatlantic slavery and resistance. In 2015, she organized and hosted an unprecedented workshop for the descendants of slaves who wrote narratives documenting their experiences. A devoted ecofeminist and gardener, she is interested in the power of art, especially literature, film, visual arts, and architecture, to enhance the human capacity to imagine, perceive, and pay attention. She has researched and taught subjects tied to the power of storytelling, including the Revolutionary Era, African American literary history, transnational women's literature, American Indian literature, and genre studies, the novel, autobiography, and biography. Robert Lawrence Wilson is a speaker, facilitator, and writer with expertise in diversity and inclusion, multicultural outreach marketing, and leadership development. Co-founder of the Culture Shift team, he leads their diversity strategy development and training across all platforms and markets from higher education and nonprofit to corporate. Robert began his journey in diversity and inclusion as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he served as a Residence Hall diversity peer educator. He has served in executive roles at Nissan North America, including as the company's first director of diversity and inclusion and as director of customer experience. He developed and led Nissan's diversity practice and multicultural market strategy for the Americas. Robert serves on the leadership boards of several nonprofit organizations promoting greater access to quality education for the nation's most at-risk student population. He is also co-founder of the Tennessee Diversity Consortium. Robert holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan and also a master's degree in business administration from Duke University. Last but certainly not least, Edson O'Neill is a speaker for Greek University. He previously served as the Director of Student Activities at St. Leo University. In that role, he advised the Student Government Union Executive Board and was overseeing the Office of Student Activities, which consists of the Campus Activities Board, clubs and organizations, community engagement, and also Greek life. Edson worked at St. Leo University since July of 2013, first serving as the Assistant Director of Student Activities, then getting promoted to the Director role in July of 2015. Edson is from St. Croix of the U.S. Virgin Islands and is a proud St. Leo alum, graduating with his Bachelor of Arts degree in Sports Management with a minor in Management Information Systems in December of 2007. Edson has also received his Master of Science in Leadership from Nova Southeastern University in December of 2010. Edson is also a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. All right, with that welcome, I'm going to turn this meeting over to Rob.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So Again, welcome everyone for being here. We're really excited to have you be part of this conversation that we're going to have. We thought it'd be just a really neat thing to be able to kind of tap Dr. Winter's mind when it comes to anti-racism and how we start to think to come from where we are now to where we want to be a year from now and even decades from now. And so we prepared a few questions for Dr. Winter to kick us off. I know, Edson, I think you're going to do the first question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Dr. Winter, how are you doing
Hi
today?
there. Good to see you, Edson.
Good to see you too. Good to hear. And thank you for everyone for attending this session today. As Rob said, it's very important. So I'm very grateful that you guys see it as being very important too. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and I appreciate every single one of you. So Dr. Winter, my first question is, tell us a little bit about your anti-racism journey, and what was your first personal experience with racism?
First, I would just really like to say thank you so much to Michael for organizing this, and to Rob and you, Edson, for our conversations over the past few days. And I'm so grateful for everyone who is here in this Zoom talk. My career began in Nashville at Fisk University, so I'm also really touched to be in connection to Nashville again. I guess everyone's journey is a little peculiar and particular to them. I grew up in a very religious community. My dad was a preacher. And so my exposure to racism really began when I was about 5 years old. We had a visiting speaker who would come about once a year to our church, whose name was Robert Sadler. And he was a really gifted pianist and singer. And all of the kids were especially thrilled whenever he came, because he, well, one of my uncles would say he got so much into the spirit that when he stood up and started to dance, the piano would keep playing. He would have the whole congregation on their feet singing and dancing. And then after that, he would relate his personal story. And he had grown up in South Carolina, born around the turn of the previous century, when, although it was, decades after the end of the Civil War, South Carolina was still in conditions that were virtual slavery. And so he had grown up in a sort of sharecropping environment where people were basically enslaved, and he would relate his story and how he came to learn that he could leave that environment. And he was as gifted as a storyteller as he was as a musician. And so his stories really broke my heart, and everyone, really loved him in that environment. And so I really think that was the beginning of my interest in the struggle against racism. The next key, really important transformative moment was when I was 19 at Indiana University. I took a course in literature of the Holocaust that really devastated and shattered me. And that was when I realized the horror of what human beings are capable of doing, and that everyone has to make a choice. And I would rather die than be a fascist. I would rather die than participate in racist violence. It's incumbent upon every single one of us to refuse that kind of evil, which absolutely infiltrates our society.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. So I think I have the next question. So you've kind of talked a little bit about your background and history. You've done some amazing work researching the transatlantic slave trade. Especially, I'm fascinated, of course, but I've told you before about your work interviewing descendants of 19th century slavery activists. And I think I got this book I told you about the other day because of your inspiration there. So talk a little bit about that, and also a little bit about how your work has impacted your own passion for anti-slavery education.
So when I was always interested in 19th century literature, and at the same time that I became interested in the struggle against racism, I was also interested in the struggle against women's oppression. And when I was in graduate school in the 1980s, there was a tremendous renaissance of African American literature. And African American literature has its origins in the slave narrative genre. And so when I was studying Victorian women's literature, and then Jean Fagan Yellen's edition of Harriet Jacobs' narrative of slavery came out, which is, as far as we know, the most fully developed narrative by a woman who experienced slavery in all of world history. It's an incredibly compelling, well-written book as well. And I began to notice some structural conversation going on between her story and what British women were writing in their predicaments. So that kind of launched me into the study of slave narratives, and I had some very influential, formative teachers and mentors in the field. But the work that I've been doing in the past few years emerged from in the early aughts. I was working on a slave narrative that was published in Vermont in 1810 and had basically disappeared for almost 200 years by an African man whose English name was Jeffrey Brace. And right when my book came out when articles about the book came out in 2004, some descendants read about it in the newspaper, and one of them, named Rhonda Brace, got in touch with me. And the family was very interested in family history, and they had traced their roots. They live in Springfield, Massachusetts, and they've lived there for many generations. But their search for their ancestors had dead-ended in the mid-19th century. And then this was their first clue, that their ancestor, who was born in West Africa around 1742, captured at the age of 16, forced to serve in the 7 Years' War, then enslaved in New England, and fought for 5 years in the American Revolution. And then he published his memoir in 1810, and they had no memory, they had no trace of this connection to their ancestor. And they had another ancestor who fought in the Civil War, that they didn't have that knowledge. And so Rhonda is about my age, and we became really good friends. And then another woman who lives in Oakland, California, named Regina Mason, was doing her family history, and she got in touch with me. And she discovered that she was a descendant of William Grimes, who published the first fugitive slave narrative in 1825. And she, although she hasn't even finished her bachelor's degree, she's a tremendous scholar. And she discovered things about her ancestor that no scholars had ever discovered. And a good friend of mine named Bill Andrews is one of the leaders in the field, worked with her so that they co-edited a new edition that Oxford published. And then Regina is such a powerhouse that she succeeded, without any money and without any experience, she succeeded in getting a documentary film about her ancestor and her quest to find him that was released a couple of years ago, called Gina's Journey, The Search for William Grimes. So Rhonda Brace, Regina Mason, and I became really good friends, and we've been working together for 15 years. And it was from I organized a conference at Oxford University on slavery around the world, and they went with me a few years ago. And just from our conversations, it evolved that there are many descendants of 18th and 19th century African American activists and authors who are not known. Like, they are extraordinary people with an amazing depth of family history, of activism, artistry, and so on. And in some cases, they've always preserved the family history. In some cases, it's been lost. And I realized that they have an incredibly exciting, galvanizing story to tell the world that really brings African American history to the foreground of public history. So it's really because of the inspiration of those two women that I've done this work, and finding and foregrounding the work of the descendants.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Winter. Very inspirational. So all of these discussions have kind of come from some of the videos we've seen in regards to Ahmaud Arbery and, of course, George Floyd. I don't know how y'all felt, but I felt very disgusted about the videos. I mean, after seeing the Ahmaud Arbery one, I couldn't even watch what happened to George Floyd because I was that struck about what's happening and what's going on. So, Dr. Winter, if you did see the videos, what was your initial reactions when you saw the videos of what happened to Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd after being killed by police and vigilantes?
This history of police violence is very old. So it's a story, I know and many of us know all too well. I have to say that I have very strong feelings about visual representations of trauma and terror. So I watched only snippets of the videos, and I won't watch them in their entirety. There is a history of using photographs and films of trauma as a source of re-traumatizing and terrorizing oppressed peoples. And so if we think back on the history of lynching, I'm very, very circumspect in ever exposing students to photographs of lynching because they were mostly created as triumphalistic souvenirs by the people involved in the lynchings. And they are there is a way in which visual images affect us differently and in ways that are harder to comprehend than words do. So I think we have to be very, very careful about them, and just ask yourself this question. How many times have you seen a person of color tortured and murdered in the news, in film, on TV? How many times have you seen a girl or a woman mutilated, raped, tortured, murdered in the news, in film, on TV? An infinite variety of times. Those texts are cultural sources of trauma and terror for oppressed people. Ask yourself, how many times have you seen a white heterosexual man tortured, raped, or murdered as a visual representation in the news, on TV, or in film? Very rarely, if ever. There is a large pornographic market for consumers of slasher films, snuff films. It's like that. I just think that we have to be very cautious about these as very explosive kinds of texts. At the same time, I'm keenly aware that as documents, there's a slipperiness. So if we think about the torture photographs from Abu Ghraib, they were taken as triumphalistic souvenirs, but they became documents of sadism that were really explosive. And I think we're seeing something like, so I think there's a really important galvanizing role for videographers, for filmmakers right now. But I also, I'm really cautious about it. And so I don't have to see the film to understand that these are public lynchings done at the hands of police. I'm there. And I think that for many people who did not want to believe, they can't deny this evidence anymore. It's come to light.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. I want to follow up with that question a little bit, and you've kind of alluded to it a little bit at the end there, but what's different? What's different about this instance? Edson and I were part of a panel just 2 weeks ago before George Floyd, before that incident happened, and a few other incidents that happened Memorial Day weekend. But this seems to have galvanized, and has been a visceral reaction in the white community in response to this particular video, though many of us, there's a long history, like you said. What's different about it this time?
My understanding right now is that there have been about 1,000 murders by police a year. So yeah, I mean, there's a long, deep history of police violence. But I do believe that that part of what's about this moment is that this is happening at a time when people have time to focus because of the coronavirus. And I also think that possibly at an unconscious level, there's a profound resonance to the idea, I can't breathe. I mean, we know the coronavirus has really highlighted racial inequalities, the savage violence of racial inequities. So in terms of healthcare, in terms of employment, and so on. And so when you have the murder of Breonna Taylor, sorry. Yeah, when Breonna Taylor, who's an EMT, I mean, there's already so much inequity in who makes money in the healthcare field, who has healthcare, et cetera. And then when she is murdered, you know, I just think that that really resonates. And so it keeps happening over and over. And then we have George Floyd, I can't breathe. And it's the predatory, savage viciousness of the police in killing someone during the time of the coronavirus. I just think it pushed millions and millions of people around the world over the board. Like, this is enough. This is not, we just can't take it. We're fighting for our lives right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Winter. So as you've seen, there's been a lot of protests going on pretty much all over the country. I've actually participated in a couple, so people are angry and they want to definitely show how upset they are and how much they want change. But with these protests, there's been a lot of diverse groups protesting. So in your opinion, what is the role these multiracial protests will play in driving systematic change?
I think that part of what we've seen in the Trump administration is that the best slogan I read by a commentator a couple of days ago was kind of the caption for him, or the banner for Trump, is malice towards all, charity toward none. And we've seen under the Trump administration the way in which racism is constantly shifting its malicious gaze. And so, from talking about the Chinese virus and the outbreak of anti-Asian racism and xenophobia, the anti-Muslim, the anti-immigrant, I guess we can say with his hysteria over Antifa, which is anti-fascist, I guess they're pro-fascist. There's this ever expanding hatefulness and malice that is threatening all of us. And so I think people feel really motivated. I think the idea that we are all interconnected, and you attack one group, you can attack another group. I think that is hitting people on a really visceral level. We're all in this together. We all have to fight together, or it's over for us. Like, American democracy is literally on the line for everyone. The dream is going to die, or we have to make it real.
All right, very powerful, Dr. Winter. Thank you for that. So specifically on college campuses, as a former higher education professional myself, what is the role you feel that professional staff should play in the support of student activism, primarily with white student activism?
I would say one of the most important things, it seems to me, for professional staff and faculty is to listen to students, hear what they're saying. There's a lot going on in campuses that faculty and staff don't see. And students have a lot to tell us. And another thing I would say to not just staff, but also faculty and students is do not assume that you understand somebody else's experience. Like, you could be a white lesbian. That doesn't mean that you understand what it means to be a gay Black man. You could be, a gay Black man. That doesn't mean you understand what it means to be a Muslim woman. Like that sense I have encountered before, a kind of arrogance, like I already understand everything about how their experience works. No. I think just having openness, that ability to listen, and then at the same time, I would say really being proactive to understand. I think if it's for anybody who listened to your last town hall a couple of weeks ago, that I think that there's what W.E.B. Du Bois called the double consciousness for oppressed communities. So African Americans have to understand what it means to be white. African Americans are exposed to white literature, white history all the time. But in this past semester, I taught a course in an introduction to women's studies, and I taught a brilliant novella written by a woman in Senegal named Mariama Ba, titled So Long a Letter. And so she's an African Muslim woman. And the novel is about a conversation between two lifelong women friends. I had students tell me that the book changed their lives because they'd never read African literature before. They'd never read anything by a Muslim woman before. And all of a sudden, their consciousness is transformed through the stories of other people's lives, other people's cultures. So I would really encourage professional staff to educate themselves and to proactively pursue educational, informational, experiential situations in which students can be expanded. Students' minds can be exposed to stories that are unlike anything they've encountered before.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. So we're going to combine our last two questions. I'm going to put up an image that you've seen before, but I'm going to try to, no, Mike, am I able to do that? Can you give me the ability to do that, or am I have to wing it a little bit? Let's try again.
Let me see if I can give you power to do that. Hold on.
If not, I can describe it as I have before.
Yeah, you might need to describe it.
Okay. There's a great image from one of the protesters. It's an older white woman who's protesting, and she has this sign up, and the sign says, "I'm 66, and I can't believe I'm still protesting this SHIT." That's what the sign says. Some of you probably have seen it before. So my question to you is, how do we go from the culture of today, which is memes and the moment of the day? We've seen in the past other movements, like some of the movements around school shooting, frankly, even some of the movement around Me Too. We've seen these movements grow and then fizzle. And so what can we do, and what can the folks listening now, what can they do to perhaps ensure that 20, 30 years from now, that someone isn't putting up another sign like that? I'm 66 years old, I can't believe I'm still protesting this. What do you think? What's your answer to that?
I have several different responses. First of all, go out and vote. We have to vote. We have to change the powers of government. We have to realize that white supremacy is not just in the toxic culture of police departments. One of the most important, let's say, kingpins of white supremacy right now is Betsy DeVos in the Department of Education. A tool of oppression is always to give no education or substandard education to oppressed people. And she is hell-bent on destroying public education in this country. There are so many issues like that that we have to fight. And I actually am inspired by that sign carried by a 66-year-old in the sense that I hope that as long as there's breath in my body, I'm still going to be fighting, because I can guarantee that 30 years from now, I hope we don't have the same racist institutions. We can't stand for that, but there are going to be other huge battles to fight. It's like when, after the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin says we have a democracy if we can keep it. Well, we didn't quite have a democracy. We had a dream of democracy. But what he was saying is he didn't expect it to last longer than 20 or 30 years. Because he didn't think people would keep fighting for it. And James Baldwin, in one of the most brilliant short stories in all of American literature, which is Sonny's Blues, it is an utterly brilliant story. And he talks about how important it is for every generation to tell their stories. So, in that sense, I hope that we're never complacent, that we're always out there fighting this shit. Because we're going to need to be. The prognosis for humanity isn't really cheerful right now. We can make it better, but we're going to have to keep fighting.
Thank you. So I think first, again, thank you, Dr. Winter, so much for your perspective on this and your long breath, I think, of history on this topic, and for really framing this for us in a way that I think is really necessary today. As more people start to engage in this conversation, I think they need to have that framing, and they need to have that historical basis so that we can really think about what actions are going to be needed. And I saw something today that was fascinating to me. It talked about performative measures, which are going to a training class or posting something on social media, or those things which are just going to be performative versus real actions, which are things that lead to policy changes, really systemic changes, which is what we're going to need in order for us not to be all having that sign in whatever years from now. So with that, we're going to change our focus a little bit. Mike, if you want to go ahead and put that up. Mike described when we started that we're actually going to do a listening session. So you're going to be moved into some breakout rooms to participate in these listening sessions. You're going to have a host with you. Mike will give a little bit of instruction about that. But really quickly, I'm going to go through some details about how this process works. So Mike, if you want to go forward, I don't have control. If you want to go forward a little bit. One more, keep going. Okay, why don't we start here? So I want to explain to you really quickly, I've got less than 5 minutes to do this, what reflective dialogue is. So reflective dialogue, it's based in some mediation type processes that have been around now for almost 30 years. But this process, it's really effective with creating a space for people to actually listen to one another. And you can see there on the screens, people who have different beliefs, experiences, perspectives seek to develop a mutual understanding. And so during this session, you're going to be able to speak your truth and speak into your experience and how these issues that have happened most recently, but over perhaps a longer period of time, have impacted you and what difference that you want to make in this space. So if you go ahead, Mike. Some of the goals, truth telling, speaking your truth. There's going to be some relationship building in these sessions that are probably going to stun you with how deep you're going to be able to go. Trust is established. Healing, we like to talk about reflective dialogue, not as something where there is healing that takes place, but a step in the journey to healing. Narrative disruption, I like what Dr. Winter said there at the last point, that oftentimes we believe that we already know the answer as it relates to other people's experiences. And this is really effective at breaking through some of that narrative. Go ahead. And this is the key. I'm going to spend the next 3 minutes explaining this, because this is the communication agreement. And this is the commitment that you're making over this. We're going to do this, I think it lasts about 30 to 35 minutes. And this is the agreement that we're expecting you all to make once you go into the breakout rooms and participate in the actual session. So first of all, we will speak for ourselves and allow others to speak for themselves with no pressure to represent or explain on the whole group. Right? This is how you feel. This is how I feel. This is not intended to be, you know, if you are a white woman, if you are an African-American man, you're not speaking for your group, you're speaking for yourself. We will not criticize the views of others or attempt to persuade them. I think that's really clear. We'll listen with resilience, hanging in when something is hard to hear. One of the things I loved about Dr. Winter's comments, some of that was hard to hear for me and for others, but this skill of learning to hang in when you're hearing something that maybe you didn't want to hear and listening. Very important, number 4, we're going to ask you some questions. You're going to see them in a second. It's important to share airtime and participate within the suggested time frame. So during the time where you're talking, you can see number 5, you will not be interrupted, okay? So this is not going to be we throw a question and you kind of shout back against one another and maybe when somebody doesn't get to speak. Everyone is going to get to speak the exact amount, same amount of time. Is going to be given the same amount of time to speak and you will not be interrupted, okay? Only time where there is interruptions appropriate is if you cannot hear a speaker and your table host, your host in your session, if you're going over your time or if you're getting close to your time, your host may say, hey, you're getting close to your time. Okay, but that will be the only interruptions that you have when you speak. You go to the next one. We will pass or pass for now if we're not ready or willing to respond to a question. Again, that's very normal. If you're not ready to speak, if you're, you know, if you want to hear more of what others have to say before you speak, that's perfectly okay. You can pass completely on a question or pass for now. Second, holding in confidence. We hear in this circle. We're not confront one another about circle comments after we leave here. We may go hard against ideas, ideologies, institutions. We will not, however, harm or attack individuals within our beyond circle. So important. If we could take that skill, number 8, and apply it to the rest of the society, perhaps we'd have less issues than we have, right? We'll go hard against ideas, ideologies, institutions, but not harm or attack individuals within or beyond the circle. Then lastly, we will not use any personal electronic devices during the confidential facilitated discussion. This section of the event has been recorded. The recording is going to go off when you go into your breakout rooms. We would like for you, if possible, to turn your cameras on. I know some of you are not able to do that or may not have been prepared to do that, and it's okay. But if you can turn your camera on, this will be a much more powerful session. And lastly, there will be one person with an electronic device. That will be your table host, who will just be keeping time. Your table host will not be participating in your breakout session. All they'll be doing in the session is keeping time and calling on people to speak and making sure people don't go over the time. Okay, none of this will be recorded. So this is your opportunity to really, again, to speak into this. We're gonna have about 30 minutes to do it based on the time we have. And it really should be a really, really powerful look into some of these issues. If you go ahead, Mike. And so we'll keep going past that. All right, and these are the questions. Okay, this is the question. First, we have 30 seconds. Name, city you're from, institution you're from, if you're from an institution. And then your answer to the question, the word I bring to this session is, and the word I hope to take away is, okay? We'd ask you to not elaborate on that. So all you gotta do is give us those 2 words. You don't have to elaborate and give your whole life story about why this is your word, okay? You have 2 minutes apiece to answer this question. What were your initial reactions when you saw the videos of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd being killed by police or vigilantes? It's the same question that Dr. Winter answered earlier. Question 2, how has your response to the recent shootings of unarmed Black people been different this time and why? This, you know, based on your past responses and why. The third question, what should be expected of all allies a year from now when specific protests may not be as prevalent? And then the last question, what role do you want to have in bringing people together, right? So 4 simple questions. You're going to be timed. At first, you may feel like you don't have enough time. What we find is that when you have time and you're not going to be interrupted and no one's jumping and you're not competing, that the amount of time we have is probably going to be enough for most people, okay? Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much for that introduction. We're now going to be going into our breakout sessions where you're going to have a table host there ready to assist. And we will see you shortly after that is concluded. We'll bring everybody back to the main room. So here we go. Chris is going to lead us in a conversation on what's next.
Yeah, it's, I'm like stumbling through my words to get it out. I know that, you know, there's a desire, I think, for us to be very prescriptive with what comes next. I know that in the session that I was in, question 3 and 4 in particular, I started having to scribble stuff down because there were so many good suggestions and ideas about how we go forward from here with respect to what do allies do and what do we want to look like a year from now. So the comment I just made to the great group of people that I had in my room was, do not underestimate education. I know that a lot of us are digging really deep in the educational part of this, learning about, we're watching movies that we haven't watched before that. We're watching movies that have been on Netflix the whole time. And now we're watching them, right? And we're reading books and reading articles and engaging in these kind of conversations. While these things are performative, they're very important. And as it relates to students, I think all of us, once we learn the history, which is why we have the expertise of Dr. Winter here, because once you start to make those connections from a historical standpoint, it does impact how students are making the links themselves and starting to change behavior. So we don't want to be dismissive of that piece, that process that we're all going through now, where we're starting to learn more and starting to understand how all these things throughout history have connected. That said, ultimately what we're trying to do is move from this performative stage into an equity stage, right? Starting to have real substantive conversations about equity at our organizations, right? And so what does that mean? So even at the student level, at the Greek organization level, how do you allocate resources, right? That's one of the first places to start with equity is how do you allocate resources? Who gets the bulk of the resources and for what purpose, right? And so the treasurer of the chapter, right? You can have that conversation at that level with what are we going to do from an activity standpoint, right? And how are we going to allocate resources for the rest of the year? Do our activities tend to attract the same types of people? Right? Greek organizations are naturally exclusive, but what does that mean? What does it mean to be exclusive in this space? And does exclusivity, what is the connection between exclusivity and inclusion when it comes to race, ethnicity, things like LGBT status, right? So resource allocation, even at the chapter level, at the organization, institutional level, it means how do resources get allocated in that space? One of the great things that I heard on our session was, as far as what comes next, right, is who's taking the lead, right? And if you've read any of White Fragility, a fantastic book by Robin DiAngelo, she has those conversations about the role that whites have to play in eliminating racism. I think the paradigm in the past has been that you let your African American colleagues, let them be up front, let them take the lead. But really, there's a really important role that whites have to play in eradicating racism, right? Because the majority in this case is whites, and so whites have a very important role to play. And so maybe think about these things as co-leadership versus choosing to stay back completely, but also think about it in terms of, are you okay not being the center of attention, right? Are you okay not being what is considered to be normal within even your workspace, right? And so what happens when you elevate the work of some of your other colleagues and you're suddenly not the center of attention? What happens when you're on the sideline in cases as well? So those are just a couple of things to think about. I know, Mike, we're going to share with everyone a resource one-pager that everyone that attended this or signed up will get. And it goes into resources, but then it also goes into some actions that you can take within your department. We have some not exercises, but kind of a methodology with respect to actions. I think that'll be perhaps helpful. But again, I don't want to minimize reading and watching things and having conversations. Also, the last thing I'll say on this, Mike, because I know you want to cover a few things as well before we depart, is make sure that you're being present for your African-American colleagues and students in this space as well, right? If you're white, you're doing a lot of learning, you're asking a lot of questions, you're checking on people. That is, there's a really wonderful human element of that. But, before you check on people, say, hey, are you interested in talking? Okay to say no if you don't want to talk right now. Don't just ask people how they're doing. Ask people what they need. Right? There's something that's been sorely lacking. I have great people in my life, but people are tending to ask me a lot of, "What are you okay?" And part of my response to that oftentimes is, well, this is kind of a joking thing I've said. Mike will probably kill me for saying this. When you say that, you always know something bad is coming, right? But one of the things I've kind of jokingly said to people is I've had so many people ask me, am I okay? And I felt like, I probably should have contacted you first, because you've just found out that racism exists in the country. And that must be really shocking to you. So I should be calling you to make sure you're okay, right? As opposed to African Americans and other ethnic minority groups or other marginalized groups, we live this every day, right? So we've already developed a lot of coping mechanisms and a lot of other systems in order to be able to succeed in this environment. It's really folks who may not have been aware or may not have accepted or may not have leaned in this deeply that are experiencing this for the first time, if you will. And I know that's oversimplifying it. So again, the question is, what do you need? And that need, maybe I heard one of the folks on our session said she was going to give her colleague who's been doing a lot of work in this space, going to give him some time just to unwind for about a week. So to make sure that he's okay, and that because it's so exhausting, right? And so I think that's a part of it as well. That's all I'll say, Mike. I'm going to take up all the time.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody that was here in this session. I know we have a lot of really good positive feedback on the reflective dialogue. So hopefully most of the people that registered got a chance to do that, because I do think it's part of the solution. So thank you so much to Robert Wilson for organizing all of this. Also for Edson O'Neill for all of the work that you put into this. Of course, Dr. Kari Winter for sharing your expertise from the University of Buffalo, my alma mater. Certainly very happy to have Dr. Winter with us today. And please be on the lookout later on today or maybe tomorrow. We're going to take a lot of the things that we learned here today and put that into a PDF document for everybody that's here in terms of next steps and some things that you can do after this meeting. So be on the lookout for that in your email box. We also recorded the beginning session and also this ending session as well. So be on the lookout. I'll put a link to it so that way if you want to share the information that you learned here today in the main session, then that will be published on the Greek University YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Greek University INC. And all of that will be posted there. You can also find a recording to our first session, our first town hall, that was called Racism in Context. That is already in that library on YouTube. So that's really what I wanted to say. Was mostly just thankful for this space. I think it's very important. And if this is something that you enjoyed, please let us know. We want to hear about that. We want to hear your feedback. My email address is bookings@greekuniversity.org. I would love to hear your feedback on this session. And if you think you want to do another session, maybe in a couple of weeks, that certainly is something that we are more than open to doing and making sure that there's a space to talk about this on a regular basis. That's all I have. Edson O'Neill, do you have any closing comments for us?
Yeah, just want to thank everyone for participating. My time it's 1:30, but I know for some of you, it's still maybe 10, 11:30 in the morning. So thank you guys for taking the time out to attend this session today. I really appreciate it. Much thanks to Mike for putting this together, Rob. We've been having a lot of conversation over the last couple of weeks, and we've been kind of venting to each other about what's been going on and kind of talking about a lot of things. So, having his support to put this together was amazing. And Dr. Winter, thank you so much for being part of this. You jumped on with no hesitation. You said, sure, absolutely. So thank you so much for attending and being on here. And to all of the professionals here or students, it's up to us to bring about change, but it takes a village. So it's on us to really work together and come together and put our egos aside, put our differences aside, and to really understand the bigger picture here. So develop allies, education, and making sure that your mindset is for good, because there's a lot of things going on that's kind of messing with people's heads. So just make sure that you guys are trying to stay positive. Definitely try to stay upright. Make sure you go to people you know that you can depend on. And it won't happen overnight, but this is the first step in us trying to move forward to a different world. So thank you guys for all you've done. I appreciate everyone here, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, I also want to say a couple of thank yous to all the table hosts. Many of you jumped in with very little notice. I mean, we were doing training sessions over the last couple of days as quickly as we could get you trained. So we really appreciate you giving your time here today. And of course, again, thank you so much to Dr. Kari Winter from the University of Buffalo. Dr. Winter, do you have any closing thoughts for us today?
I just want to say thank you to all of the organizers, again, Michael, Edson, and Robert, and also for everyone who came. Please keep up the fight. I'm so inspired by all of you and your presence and activism. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. We hope you have a good rest of the day. And hopefully we'll see you on another session. Hopefully we'll do another reflective dialogue session very soon. So thank you so much for participating, and we'll see you soon.